Peter Hill Explains, where I invite you to join the science teaching conversation with me about podcast for two Mars interested people. One is a local Josh Richards, another is Elon Musk. I probably expect Josh Richards to listen to this, perhaps not Elon Musk's, but both these people are got two characteristics. They're very interested in going to Mars, apparently, and interested in sort of celebrity interest in going to Mars. Like I could be interested in going to Mars or going to anywhere. No one would be too interested in it. That knack of being really interested in it. Another aspect is that if sort of really practical, realistic people, i.e. respond to their investment in leadership in rocketry. You've got Elon Musk. If there's and most people know about it. It's just actually taking a practical problem and actually using of what's out there with it. Got a little bit of a mix between dream and reality, trying to get that mixture right to create something new. So a lot of people can get the dream and extract it from the reality and wonder why nothing's happening. Both of these people are sort of doing the alchemy of adding dreams to reality. So the aim of this is just to have a breath and think about what the actual Martian surface is like chemically, and what's negative and what's positive about that. But go about Josh Richards. I went to a talk to him, and he's signed up as Australia's leading contestant or leading person to go to Mars. He's a Mars colonist. Worked with the British Royal Marines, and he's holding down a job, I think, in a school as a lab assistant. I'm not quite happening at the moment, but he is also a stand-up comedian, and I think it was Keith the anger management koala. It's quite funny things to see it. So if you know koalas, they sort of sit there in a tree all the time, and to think that they'd need anger management is rather funny. So it's quite a witty guy. But he's also a deeply great communicator. This is Josh Richards. Elon Musk, I suppose, yes, he is a great communicator. I just haven't really listened to much what he said. I've just read his stuff and listened to ideas, but I can talk a bit about Josh Richards because I've listened to him, I've followed him on, and I've sent him the odd email from time to time. So he's fully committed to looking at Mars, and he talks about it, how people get there, some basic ideas of, just give you a few ideas, the ethical problems of what happens if you go to Mars and you find that you've got a kid back home. Essentially, Mars is such a high radiation environment. The trip is such high radiation that NASA says the maximum a round trip exceeds the maximum radiation dose. So essentially, if you travel to Mars, you can't come back. You're going to have so much radiation on the trip that it's beyond the safe limits. So the idea is that you go to Mars. It's a one-way trip. That's one of the ideas. I don't think many people think of that one. But there's also the idea of how you deal with excrement, and this is the waste product that you produce, and radiation. And the idea Josh put forward is that you cover the inside of your capsule with excrement to shield from cosmic rays. Now, of course, all that I understand about cosmic rays and the actual force, I don't know whether any amount of shielding is going to really help you against cosmic rays. I think you really need an Earth-sized magnetic field, in my humble opinion. But nothing to kill a bad story. And then, of course, listening to it, I was very positive, more interested in people dealing with things. So Josh was dealing with the problem of what if you go up there and you discover that you've got a son, so he's or a daughter. What's the ethics of that, and particularly if that son or daughter requires an organ transplant and you're the only compatible organ donor, and you've just been shot up into space. All these incredibly complex things, and so Josh has had an operation, so he can't have any children or whatever. I think that's called a vasectomy or things like that. And so telling that to this group of science people listening through it. My only view about that is that there's sort of two ways you can work as ethics. Is you can sort of work from inside a problem, and as each ethic problems, you formulate each ethics problems as you come up, you can get a solution for them. And that's one way of doing it. It's just that's a very exhaustive method of doing it. That's the method of solving ethics by sort of with a bat. You know, you're going to bat down every single problem. There's other ways of looking at ethics which are more complex, more circumspect, and just rather than take you on the path that you're trying to go, it takes you in another path. I haven't really expressed that very well, but going through it. So Josh, and one of the things commented is, what if there is life on Mars and you going to Mars would contaminate Mars? You know, how do you deal with that? There's all these ethical issues coming out, which to me, look, I have another ethical issue, sort of, you know, the overall structure of the greatest good. You know, if the amount of money put on Mars in, say, the next 100 years, if you save that money, would you really avoid some of the problems that you're trying to leave the planet Earth for? You know, the are you creating the problem which you're trying to solve? That's one of my questions that I'd be asking. But one of the things you pick up from Josh and from looking at Elon Musk is they're not stupid, and they're not. They will listen to problems and will think their way through it. So here's the fundamental problem, in that essentially chemically the Martian soil is very close to pool chlorine. It's got a lot of perchlorate. So what the little landers went out and actually took a little soil sample for the top, and I think 15 centimetres down, and they found there was a lot of perchlorate. And it so happened that the actual landers packed a lot of perchlorate, and so there is a possibility that the landers could have, perchlorate is a highly chemically reactive substance, and so they had to figure out, was this actually perchlorate? You know, is this true? Is the Martian surface covered with highly sterilising rocket fuel, or did we bring the rocket fuel there and they were able to logically work out, well, rocket fuel's got two components, got the perchlorate and the ammonium, stick together the two together to make a rocket, and without the other, you know, part B of the rocket fuel, we know that the part A, which is not in the same, it's got a ratio of part A to part B. If you've got a contamination, it's part A to part B, but this is only part A, so the whole surface is covered with part A perchlorate rocket fuel. And so this means that the surface of Mars, from top to bottom, is covered with a sterilising chemical. Now let's talk about the sterilising chemical. Basically, if Mars was covered with water, there'd be a lot of sodium chloride, so there's a lot of sodium chloride there. And then over time, it's felt that the titanium oxide, with UV light, turned the sodium chloride progressively into sodium perchlorate. And this is one of the, I suppose, sub-lessons that I wanted to get across, was the rather than periodic, you think of the periodic table and you think of definitional aspects. There's these oxidation journeys, and this is chlorine with no oxygen and no electron is chlorine. If you add an electron to it, it's chloride. If you add an oxygen to it and an electron, okay, I don't think you can, it's hypochloride. Hypo means chlorite, ITE. it means that it should have two, but there's one oxygen missing, so there's only one oxygen, and that's hypochlorite. Calcium hypochlorite is your pool chlorine. And as you move up, you get more and more biologically active. And then you have chlorite, which is ClO2 minus, but you can have it also ClO2 gas. Now, the ClO2 gas is our disinfecting agent gas of choice. So after 9/11, when there was a fear of anthrax or fear of chemicals nasties, and they wanted to clean a large area, they just pumped this gas in, and it basically disinfected the whole place. So in terms of disinfecting power, it's getting up there. You know, chlorite, believes in mouthwashes so chlorite is ClO2. Chlorate, ATE, is ClO3 and O3 minus, and that's in bleaches and stuff like that. So we're getting more and more, you know, if I want to, basically Mars is covered with super toilet cleaner. So it's iron, ide, hypoite, ite, and perite. Was it perchlorate? The chlor is the chlorine. The main focus there is that this chlorate is highly aggressive. It would not be a nice thing to get on you, and it would definitely, basically, if you were going to open the door of Mars life thing after a heavy night drinking, or a wee, I suppose, and wanted to bath, if you vomited, you wouldn't have to worry about putting any disinfectant on it, because the actual soil itself is a pretty powerful disinfectant. So that's sort of the thing that if you want to grow stuff on Mars, you've got to do 2 steps. But it's not such bad news. So the idea is that solar energy has actually made Mars a giant solar rocket fuel farm with this perchlorate. This is one of the things that people say, oh yeah, and there's so much percentage of perchlorate. What you sort of say, let's really look at that, what that would mean. But it means that if you heat up this perchlorate, it decomposes into oxygen. Like, what? You can just get a whole pile of Martian soil, heat it up, and you've got your oxygen supply. And we've now found there's some water supply. So you've got a whole lot of gruesome things happening to you in Mars. Now, the great thing is, you know, what is the advantage of being on Mars as opposed to just in orbit around Mars? Well, I think your radiation dose is going to go down by a factor of 2, because you've got Mars, at least the one side of Mars is not, you're not going to get as much radiation from Mars itself. It'll be a reasonably good shielding. Your head is going to be pretty exposed when it's there. So I think, that being said, then it would make sense in terms of the actual area that you're shielded is to make your way down to one of the canyons and actually bury yourself in that way. So if you want to get deep down Mars, go down into a canyon and then drill into Mars. That way you're sure to find some water there, I'm sure. The great thing is that you're not going to be short of oxygen in Mars. If there's that much perchlorate there, that's worthwhile seeing. So I know from Josh Richards, he'd be fascinated to know this. I know he's good at science and all that type of stuff, and he might be able to get back to me and refute everything I've said. So you're wrong, and I'd be welcome someone to actually go through and have a debate. At the moment, we're suffering the worst. We are behaving in exactly the way that we want to tell these Mars people off for. as being headstrong and jumping on things. As soon as we say there's water on Mars, but it's absolutely soaked with disinfectant, which would kill all DNA as we know it, just rip it to shreds. So just to give you an idea, if you throw yeast into hydrogen peroxide, perchlorate, peroxide, hydrogen peroxide means there's extra oxygen in there. That's so lethal to life that we've got enzymes in it. So you throw yeast into peroxide and it completely decomposes it. So there's going to be a possibility of completely decomposing the oxygen there. There's a lot of interesting stuff that you could do. So I come from this sort of, let's talk about it scientifically, that's worthwhile. And perhaps the most worthwhile thing is whether we launch there or not, is the technologies being developed for it, but also the ethics that we develop, being able to not just actually plough through, is the ethics right or wrong, but is the whack-a-mole ethics a way to go, or do we have another more global ethics system that we can go? Like the ethics of this entire exercise, to me, is going to be perhaps as important. Like the method that we go through to actually get the ethics of this right is going to be as important to me, I think, the human race, as the actual expedition. But as for a insurance policy of going beyond one planet, it's not that debate is wrong, it's just that debate is something that is going to track us through a whole lot more ethical issues. Thanks a lot for listening. See you, Josh, and I'm sure we'll get to the people interested in Mars, who are genuinely interested in solving the problems here, would be interested in it. Though I don't think they'd be offended by it at all. I just think it raises a different way of solving, a different way of thinking of it. Thanks a lot for listening. Another podcast, another story comes to a close. It's been a pleasure sharing this moment in time with you. May you discover truly amazing things, understand them, and tell others. Thanks for listening.